So thank you, everyone. It's kind of odd to work for Microsoft and to come just after a photo of a blue screen crash, yeah? So thanks very much. I think, pun intended, I should say. So thank you, appreciate that. A brief introduction first is, I'm not going to speak really about DevOps on the Windows platform that much. A little bit, sorry, I'm going to touch it. The problem is my background, I'm purely open source. So I'm at Microsoft only for 4 months. Please look me up onto your profile, but I work for companies like Red Hat, Canonical, OpenStack company, etc. So really, I'm sorry, I mean, I'm a pure open source guy, but I'm going to speak to you and show how we can bridge the gap, particularly with a platform such as Azure. So the first thing, really, the most important, is the news. So sorry, should have done that first, yeah. So in the news, so what will we find in the news is that, well, it's been mentioned, but the Microsoft transformation is complete. I can guarantee my personal experience when I received a job offer from Microsoft, I actually turned in my bed for about a week, right? I was going, my God, having such an open source credential for me was actually a big risk. I'm going, am I going there? Are they going to really live to the name of open source? Are they really going to transform? Are they really going to change? And I think what you're seeing in the news for the last 6 months, 8 months, a year, is actually the truth. And being on the inside, I can tell you, yes, it's amazing as a transformation. In fact, I worked for another very large company before that wasn't so good at transforming. This one, I'm actually impressed. I'm impressed by the number of things that are being open source out there. I'm being impressed by the way where products, for example, are removing the operating system requirement. I'm impressed Office is delivered online across multiple platforms nowadays. So this, you're seeing examples slowly and slowly. But essentially, to resume all that, Microsoft has understood that to do business, you need to be open. And you need to be open and transparent across technology. Now, Microsoft being such of a large culture and a long-term investment into IT, into computing, imaging it's very hard for us to do flip, right? 200,000 employees flip, no, you can't. So it's going to be progressive. It's things that you're going to see slowly and slowly in particular area, but that transformation exists. And the idea is the platform is really what we want, right? And having a large cloud, it's no surprise nowadays. It's been revealed by your CTO several times, but today I can tell you that the Azure platform is 22% of Linux workload globally. And this, again, if you've seen a commercial for Linux on Azure from Microsoft, you're better than me because I haven't seen any. And really the reality behind that is this has grown organically. The reality is at the end of the day, you want an infrastructure as a service cloud that's going to provide you compute, network, storage, and at the end of the day, who cares what workload you run? As long as you can get the resources, you can get them fast, you can have your fast turnover. That's really the important part there. So openness is company cross-value, and I mentioned it. It's been revealed in the past that Microsoft, maybe they don't know what they're doing. Well, the reality is we have so many sections that have been working on open source for the last 10 years. It's no secret that Microsoft Open Technology is actually a side part of the company that does exclusively that. They only research open source. Go to channel 9 MSDN as a resource. You will find a lot of video on how to do open source stuff, on how to effectively use open source framework, even with the Windows platform, with the .NET platform, with all those different ecosystems. So what I want to mention today is where in the past you had clearly, particularly for web platform, you had IIS, ASP.NET on one side, Linux, Apache on the other. I think nowadays that platform is being bridged. And of course, things like Azure are helping us to do this. So what is DevOps? DevOps is this, right? Anyone? Something wrong there? Well, yeah. This is absolutely not DevOps. This is called Waterfall, yeah? This is the old style, yeah? This is actually developing in silos and coming back and having a set responsibility absolutely everywhere. And what do we see DevOps at Microsoft? Well, this is how we see it. And effectively, the most important thing into DevOps, into the process, is really the fact that it comes back on its own step. It's a continuous loop. It's based around people, around those 4 steps: plan, develop, test, release, operate, go back to plan. And what's very important to understand is this will speed up, this will accelerate development, testing, where in the past it take you ages to go through dev, through UAT, through live, to have your testing, to have your chain of approval, to have different people in different silos that are actually requesting approval. And yes, this is the right picture, but it's not so easy to move to that, especially so if you're a young startup, tomorrow you're starting a brand new thing, you have 5 people in your team, yeah, that's very good, go on there directly. But if you have any kind of legacy, if you have any kind of infrastructure that already exists, That's going to be quite hard to suddenly move to that. It's a daunting change in your organization. And again, what is DevOps? So the tagline you will find out there is that DevOps, it's a dual role, it's developer and operation together, doing a single. Well, no. DevOps is more of a state of mind than anything. I think that tagline is often what you see for people who simplify what DevOps is. In fact, in large organizations, it's going to be very hard to mix the operation with the true developers. And it's going to be very hard to make them do the same thing. You don't agree? Great. I have some questions for you later. But essentially, what I think is important in DevOps is to treat infrastructure as code. So what I wrote there, CI/CD, is for me the most important movement that has happened in development for the last 10 years. Continuous integration, continuous delivery. Really the idea to continuously test, to integrate the testing part of your application, part of your code, and to have effectively self-validation. And this brings us to the idea of having dev, so the cloud infrastructure and framework have a programmatic infrastructure. They've been having one for a while, but with the arrival of public cloud, we'll find those API are now managing infrastructure. Or do I deploy a VM? It's a line of code. Or do I set a virtual network? It's a line of code. Or do I provide a block storage service to my instance? It's a line of code. So all this can be coded, all this can be programmatic. I can tap into my API with the true tool of my choices and effectively have something that is plannable, and more importantly, deterministic and with idempotency. And that's one of the biggest, most, I would say, daunting projects into making sure you will be able to transfer your application across different cloud infrastructure. And again, gain that ability, that interoperability across different environments. And you do this effectively by treating your infrastructure as code. Now, how do I treat really infrastructure as code? Yeah, it's nice to say it. Oh, yeah, do that. Well, here it is. And it's a lot more daunting than you can think. So if we look at continuous integration right now, who can right now develop a project internally, externally, can actually stick to everything on the left? So do you maintain a single source repository? Well done. Thanks. I didn't expect the guy who speak after. Yeah, that's not fair. Yeah. Do you automate the build? Do you make your build self-testing? All commits should go every day to the main line, to your main repository, right? All commits should build. So you should build on a test machine and have validation tests, but every single commit should build. If you don't build at the end of a commit, well, you haven't done the DevOps cycle. You're coming back into Waterfall. You're coming back into siloed organization where you wait, where you test, when you reproduce. And again, the ability to do that, to keep the build fast, to test in clone environments, to make it easy for anyone to get the latest, and to automate the deployment, these are already very hard to achieve. And again, if you start something from scratch, yes, I will recommend you go there. But when you move from a legacy, it becomes very hard. So you're going to go slowly and slowly. It's a transformation process. It's to say, right, what can I automate? What can I make things who look more DevOps at that stage? And still maintain, obviously, my release cycle, still maintain my stakeholder within the company. And this is very hard. And continuous delivery is even harder, I will say. And this is where the automation of the infrastructure and of the code against your cloud provider, your internal infrastructure, or whichever you have, that's where effectively the programmatic of that infrastructure is very important, because you're going to be able to make your code self-aware of the infrastructure behind. You're going to make your code deploy the infrastructure for testing, writing the test, downloading the code, building the code, write the test, send you an email, destroy the resource. That'd be good to have that every night. Little scripts that run. And of course, we're going to speak about that. That's where the CMDB, all the guys, the chef, and etc. are working your task for. But really, what I wanted to mention is, for me, DevOps is treating infrastructure as code. So it's a state of mind rather than just a role change. Role change may occur, depends the company, depends what you have, but really the state of mind is the most important. So why do we need DevOps? And of course, you can find all the lovely reason around it that people have mentioned. Why do we need it? But I think the most important of all on that slide is really it takes forever for a new solution to be deployed. By having those siloed environment and those validation, effectively, the cycle of release becomes really long. And when the cycle of release becomes long, legacy comes in. Stuff that we don't really want comes in. The agility goes away. Our ability to deploy goes away. And this is really where the goal of DevOps is actually stay. As you notice, again, that continuous loop always. So it's a process you start and always roll back on itself. And of course, you should improve it. You should look at where it fits or where it doesn't. So I think this defines pretty well what DevOps is. Sorry, that was the big question of today. So all those Visual Studio Online, linked with Azure, actually mix with the DevOps process. Well, as you can see on that figure, it pretty much works all the way. And what's good about Visual Studio is it's been developed, of course, to keep up with the DevOps process. So you could be a full Windows development house only working with Microsoft, only working with Visual Studio. You still have the ability to integrate the DevOps process with it. Particularly, obviously, with Azure in the middle. That's going to be your develop and learn platform, where you're going to be able to automate deployment of infrastructure, release of code, and all those steps. But again, this is the integration of the Microsoft side. So now, I don't want to present just this, because, Visual Studio might be work for you, might not work for another. And there's a lot of IDE on the market. And the goal is not to lock you into an IDE. It's not to lock you anywhere, actually. And what we do is we come to Azure. And Azure, lately, don't know if you heard, but we moved from 11 to 19 regions. So it's actually the biggest public cloud in the world. There's resources available everywhere. But more importantly, as I mentioned before, 22% of our workload are not just Microsoft. So I want to make that very clear, because Microsoft came out with Azure first with a lovely integrated PaaS Microsoft platform on it, which of course attracted the big Windows workload. And of course, they're running there very well. And that's actually the prime choice platform for a Microsoft stack to go in the cloud. But what's interesting is on the side, the companies that start doing that, they say, oh, actually you can run some Linux as well on this. Oh, there's actually a fair bit of image. There's actually a whole ecosystem of applications that are available there. Guess what? I still have a RESTful programmable API. Well, it's easy to integrate. And at the end of the day, this is exactly what I'm trying to tell you here today, is Azure is actually an infrastructure as a service platform, as well as a PaaS as well. But that infrastructure as a service power help you to take Azure and to be part completely of your strategy in a public cloud strategy. As the word says, don't put all your cloud eggs in the same cloud basket, if you know what I mean. So effectively having different infrastructure which you can rely on. One of my colleagues, Simon Wardley, who was a big visionary for the cloud, used to mention this thing called redundant array of inexpensive, not disk, cloud providers, right? So a rake or something like that. But the ability to say, my workload is idempotent, I'm developing with a base of structure and resources available in a public cloud, then I'm happy to actually mix, and I'm happy to have different resources. So that's really the openness of your application that you need to think of. So you don't need to move everything to the public cloud, but the public cloud has value for everything. And here I represented the 4 big lines of what we're seeing of the advantage of something like a public cloud, which, remember, is going to charge you with a metering at the key of it. So a lot of people call that pay-as-you-go. And please, I just want to reset the expectation there. The whole principle of the cloud is telemetry, to look at what you used, then charge you in arrear for what you use. The cloud is not good enough to predict what you're going to use in the future, right? So it's a payment in arrear, effectively. And the beauty is that you can have those on and off activity. You're always going to be charged for what you need. You can have those growing fast, ultra scale. And again, the beauty of not having to worry about your own infrastructure and to scale your own infrastructure, one of the beauty there too. Unpredictable demand. Suddenly you get some spike, the Christmas rush. I mean, people who run, e-commerce, website, and things like that, very familiar with that concept. And finally, the predictable bursting, so the ability to do hybrid from the get-go, the ability to say certain apps are delivered from certain regions, certain area, and of course having a policy there or distribution of my apps or know how I do things. So very important to understand those concepts. I thought I had to add a slide with trillion on it. So these are my numbers. Azure numbers, they're very impressive. It's a very large cloud. The growth is big. Sorry, this was not perfectly sized, but these are Linux VMs, as you can see. So a fair bit, it's gone to 22. I know this from this morning. Again, some very large clouds. So what's important to realize is it's a very large infrastructure. You can define affinity into it. You can effectively rely on different zones at different DR. There's even a DR services in Azure that does that automatically for you. Another point I want to mention on Azure, compared to my experience of other clouds, I will say, without pointing anyone in particular, we have persistence built in. For anybody that doesn't get that, what I mean by this is on normal public cloud, you launch a VM or an instance, you put 10 gig of data on it, you stop the instance, you just lost 10 gig of data. Sorry, I'm trying to simplify much, but what I'm trying to say is when the instance leaves, the disk is persistent. When the instance goes away, that disk is not saved. You lose pretty much what we call ephemeral drive, essentially, which are good for cloud, for those workloads. In Azure, it's a bit different because of the technology underneath it. It's Hyper-V behind it. Nobody is hiding that. And because of that, it's a true VM that has persistence. So if whatever you change on the disk is being written directly to the image, and you have effectively your persistence there, which is okay, help you to not move 100% to the cloud, but it can really help you moving to the model of the cloud, effectively coming from things like virtualization and gold images, if that makes sense. I thought I had to publish some nice graphs. So this is our Linux versus Azure over year, quarter by quarter in Azure, and you can see, yeah, we even go towards the 23%. So again, very interesting to see that use, and this is reflected by our customer in Azure that have an interest for running Windows workload, past Windows services, but as well as infrastructure as a service too. We just launched HD Insight. So HD Insight is our Hadoop as a service on Azure. That's the name of our service. We just launched it running on Linux VM. It looks nothing, but it's actually the first time that Microsoft runs a managed Linux services themselves. So have a look, have a try, very interesting as well. So the full stack is on Azure. So what you can see on the left column is actually any application that you'll find on Azure, in a store, in the Azure Gallery that are actually fully supported by Microsoft. What does that mean? That means that you can call us and we'll help you on it. On the right, you'll find anything that is curated by us. And what does that mean? That means it's a community play, essentially. The package is available, the image is available, very easy to trigger if you want to look at it. But when it comes to support, you go back to community or obviously from the vendor of those. What we made is made the technology available. So it becomes very easy to build a full stack of different open source applications and other applications with Azure by mixing the environment just by using the images there, without to have to compile anything yourself or build anything yourself. And again, we extend in this every day and every day. And the more applications are coming. Of course, another thing very big is bring you on. So, you know, a lot of people ask me, what do you do in a cloud? Do you start with a blank image and then you orchestrate it? And I'm sure we're going to touch that later on in the talk. Well, I think it depends. And I think if you have a lot of modification internally on your images, if you're doing your builds, validated build internally that have to go through a certain process, then it becomes interesting for you to push your own image to the cloud while you're running. That means you're not going to start from scratch. That means that you have something that is already business validated, and then you can work from there. So something, you know, not to forget, orchestration is great, but it's not the answer to everything. Of course, we have a DevOps tool as well, on Azure as well. These are maybe things that you recognize or that you work with in the past. And of course, libjcloud, jcloud, and all the knife, the Puppet, Vagrant, and the Azure CLI. I want to mention the Azure CLI. This is a tool made by Microsoft. I'll show you a reference at the end of the slide deck where you can see it. But essentially, it's a command line tool that works on Mac, on Linux, on any Unix shell. And that gives you, 2 minutes, and that gives you a programmatic vision, effectively. You can effectively, from a command line, 100% operate with Azure. You can log in, launch VM, put a load balancing, put a virtual network, prepare storage, etc., etc. So this is interesting. Why? Because it allows you to access, of course, PowerShell if you're on a Windows platform. But if you're not, the Azure CLI helps you, again, to be cross-platform. Getting Linux and FreeBSD image, as I mentioned, you have the marketplace where you will have third and third-party created apps. Some of those apps come with their own topology. So if you go and deploy Hortonworks Big Data there, you click, yep, I want the HDP platform, boom, that will come across 20 cores with his own topology. It will be already tested as a whole application across the core. So again, very easy to get going rather than having the single appliance to get actually a bigger topology of an application. The VM Depot will help you as well to get any other images there. There's currently up to 2,000 images there of various software, various Linux distribution, whatever you need. Finally, Docker. Who uses Docker? Oh, wow, I was expecting more. Sorry. So one quick revelation is Docker is coming in Windows Next. So Windows vNext, the next version of Windows Server, will have a Docker engine internally. So of course, you could play with containerization of your Windows image, not just Linux images. And another thing is just, look at that command line. So this is the Azure command line tool I mentioned. Just this command line in a shell will actually deploy a Linux instance, download Docker of it, create a Docker hub, create your container. Just after this, you can immediately itemized with Docker there. So it's several iterations with your Docker hosted in Azure, which is on top of an hypervisor and obviously reproducible across the Azure region. So quite an interesting setup there as well. Finally, this is a vision, sorry, again, not full on. This is the brand new portal. So just to say that we're programmatic, we have tools for all platforms, but we have some very nice graphics too, by the way. So if in case you want to see them, they're available. Azure.microsoft.com. If you log it in there, you have different portal. That's one of those. The ability to see all the health all across the whole region of Azure. That's interesting if you have a multi-geographical deployment. And finally, as I mentioned, Documenter Center. So any browser, client device, Windows, Linux, as you can see, a large collection of framework. All the SDK are there. They're available to download. There is actually too much documentation. That's actually the complaint that I've received from a few. It's great, but do you have something simplified? So, I mean, it's actually good to be able to dig deep. And the other one, obviously, github.com/Azure. Please have a look. There's 4 pages of project there. The command line tool that I mentioned, a lot of different projects. And there, we're taking really the open road. So it's pushed in Azure. You want to see the roadmap? Watch it in Azure. You want to make in GitHub. You want to make a request? Subscribe to it on GitHub. Put message on GitHub. So operate it like you will on any open source project in GitHub, right? And as my 2 minutes are just expiring, this is effectively, sorry, the completely non-shameless advertising there. Please go and have a look. What I think was completely interesting in there is to show you a bit what you can do with that month trial. So to have an idea of capacity and resource. I think something that is not well explained in the public cloud nowadays is because the amount of money are obviously per small period, and it's very cheap, it's very hard to put around your head what $100 on the public cloud represent, what 50 quid represent, etc., etc. So I think here you have an idea, so up to 3 VM running 24/7 for a month, that's about what it is, 2.3 terabytes of geo-replicated storage, etc., etc. So it's a good start to get in, and obviously after that, you start to get charged a bit like a utility company, so don't forget to leave the tab, to close the tab, yeah? If you leave them open, the bill will go up. Yeah. And that's it. Thank you very much.